So folks, I'm going to give you about a 2-minute warning and I will get started.
Are live on YouTube, so just wanted to give you guys the heads up.
Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Wesley McNeese. I am the Southern Illinois University System Executive Director for Diversity Initiatives. This evening's conversation will be about African American history at Southern Illinois University and in SIU regions. This will be a 2-hour virtual discussion, specifically for the Southern Illinois University community, but also for its extended audience. And it's sponsored by the SIU System President's Office and also that system's Diversity Advisory Council. You will hear a panel of SIU institutional and student leaders. They will give their thoughts about the evening's topic, and then you will be invited to ask questions and or make comments. SIU System President, Dr. Daniel Mahoney, will make closing remarks. Our panelists this evening are Dr. Harriet Barlow. She's Executive Director, The Intersection, an academic multicultural resource center at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Barlow has near 30 years of history with SIU Carbondale as a student and faculty administrator. Hannah Friedman is with us. She's an SIU Carbondale Junior, Executive Director of Alt News 2646. We also have Dr. Andrew Theising, a professor of political science, SIU Edwardsville, and Dr. Timothy Staples. He's Executive Director, SIU Edwardsville, East St. Louis campus. Beret Madden and Mariam Bakare are third-year medical students and co-presidents of the Student National Medical Association, SIU School of Medicine, Springfield, and they will be co-presenting. Dr. Christine Todd is chair of the Department of Medical Humanities, SIU School of Medicine. Dr. Joseph Brown, professor, Department of Africana Studies, SIU Carbondale will be our moderator. And Todd Bryson, the interim Associate Chancellor for Diversity, SIU Carbondale, will monitor questions and comments from our audience. Carol Walker is our Zoom coordinator. Father Brown, would you please lead us through the conversation?
We'll all find out together, won't we? I'm used to leading, but I'm also used to no one following me. We're going to do the best we can. This is an incredibly exciting panel. Now, the format has been for the prior ones that we will ask each panelist to present an opening statement for about 10 minutes. And then we'll move around from campus to campus. And then we will have open discussion and time for people to send us questions, which Mr. Bryson will be moderating. And we hope that he'll be able to figure out a way to get me to understand what the questions are so we can ask them. I'm not promising anything other than my usual style of being a mess. But I really am excited about this because I have a history of Southern Illinois. And I'm sure that I was picked to be moderator so I wouldn't dominate the whole thing with my own personal story, since I'm almost as old as the salt mines of Saline County. But we will begin, I suppose, with the oldest campus. So why don't we start with our SIU Carbondale representatives? And I think it would probably be very good to not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you will, Dr. Barlow, but I think you're a native of Southern Illinois also. You're not. Well, then I'm just going to use your 30 years of history and your legendary status at SIU in order to introduce you and ask you to make the opening comments, and we will all be paying attention.
Thank you, Father Brown. I spent all of my adult life in SIU in Carbondale, so I guess that makes me a native, but no, I'm not. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of the Conversations of Understanding and this invitation to be a part of this extremely important series and today's discussion. I would also like to extend a congratulations to Dr. Lane on being named the Chancellor of SIUC. Certainly in and of itself, that is a historical milestone for the campus. And I join a host of African-American alums who are looking to him to enhance and in many ways restore the SIU legacy that so many of us continue to revere today. Although I do not consider myself a historian by any stretch of the imagination, I do believe that my experiences as an African-American student and administrator at SIUC in large part shaped who I am and provides the foundation for any accomplishments that I may enjoy today. So let me take you back a little bit. The year is 1869. 151 years ago. In the shadows of the American conflict that would mark the end of 400 years of physical enslavement of a people of African descent. In a place less than 100 miles from the extended Mason-Dixon line, separating the Union from the Confederacy, Southern Illinois Normal University was chartered in the state of Illinois in Carbondale. Among its inaugural class of 143 students, 2 were African American. Now, we have no way to know who or what may have served as the power brokers to allow African Americans to be among that first class of SIU collegians. One can only imagine that it did not occur by consensus or by agreement. But after all, this newly chartered institution would find itself in Southern Illinois, a region that came into the Civil War with a marked pro-slavery inclination. But regardless of how this decision was reached, The fact is that it was reached, and in my opinion, is one of the most important and significant African-American historical events that not only impacted the development of Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, but also ushered in the expectation that at SIUC, African-American students would be able to see what they could become. In preparing for today's remarks, my initial plan was to tackle this subject through the lens of being a 3-degreed, 20-year administrator and second-generation SIUC alum. But in gathering my thoughts, the question that continued to come to mind was, what is it about SIUC that makes SIU alums, particularly African-American alums, hold it in such reverence? As I contemplated the answer to that question, I reflected back to writing my dissertation and learning for the first time that African Americans, former enslaved individuals, were students who were among that inaugural class. I remember how proud I was of the fact that my alma mater made a conscious decision to open the doors of education to those who looked like me just 4 years after the Civil War, something that would continue to be the case for generations to come. Father Brown, I grew up in Robbins, Illinois, a small suburb right outside of Chicago that was very specifically established for African Americans during the Great Migration. In my hometown, albeit very poor, there were doctors, lawyers, educators, mayors, policemen, all African American. I learned about SIU from my dad, who had gone to SIU. He told very colorful stories about his time at SIU during the 1950s. A favorite was recalling how his classmate and fraternity brother, Dick Gregory, defied the racial norms at the time by refusing to sit in the balcony of the Varsity Theater. While names like Moulin Rouge, Dixie, and the House of Southern Comfort were subtle reminders of the housing segregation and discrimination experienced by African American students, SIU's yearbooks during this time also picture African Americans engaged in campus life. In these pictures, I would see my high school speech coach, my home economics teacher, my history teacher, future sorors, all African American. And I saw in those pictures what I could be. In 1954, as the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial discrimination or racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional, my dad would become an SIU alum. Soon after the election of Chicago Mayor Richard Daley in 1955, it is said that SIU President Dwight Morris met with this powerful mayor and promised to deliver special Southern hospitality to Chicago students, and particularly African-American students who were usually discriminated against and or had problems at other predominantly white institutions. In 1962, while segregationists rioted to keep James Meredith from attending Ole Miss, the African-American student enrollment at SIU, or so it is said, was to be holding steady at between 12 and 14% of the total student population. When I arrived at SIU in the fall of 1970, the riots that had occurred earlier that spring were not a deterrent to my excitement of finally being a Saluki. I would quickly come to learn that I was among nearly 3,000 African-American students all vying to become alums. I remember walking around campus wondering why was it that all of these Black students, all of these African-American students who did not know who I was, always took time to say hello with a smile. I thought it very odd at first, but then I quickly learned that that was an expression of love, camaraderie, and perhaps even a coded message to say that I was not alone, a practice that no doubt I believe continues today. During my undergraduate years, news began to spread quickly about 3 Black males, Seymour Bryson, Harold Bardot, and Edgar Rulak, who were working on doctoral degrees. And although most of us had no idea exactly who these three men were, we were in awe of this accomplishment and we were instilled with pride. When I graduated in 1974, I remember seeing an African-American man being hooded as a symbolic gesture of having completed a doctoral degree. While I am sure that Dr. Edgar Rulick has no idea as to who I am, watching him being conferred that doctoral degree on that May afternoon was inspirational and profound. And seeing that, I realized once again that I could see what I could be. I like to think that the spirit of perseverance that Dr. Alexander Hale had, who became in 1881 the first African-American male to receive a degree from SIU, lives in all of us who have come after him. The spirit of Gilbert Holmes, the founder of the Dunbar Society in 1929, I like to believe lives on as SIUC African-American students ceremoniously greet each other with a warm and heartfelt hello. I like to think that the spirit of Dick Gregory lives in all of us who seek equality and justice. I like to think that this same spirit catapulted Joan Higginbotham into outer space. I like to think that this spirit led three of the Little Rock Nine, Minnie Jean, Thelma, and Terrence, to choose SIUC. Since 1869, for 151 years, SIUC has provided a constant and sustained opportunity for African Americans to see what and who they could be. While I in no way seek to underplay or ignore the challenges that African American students, faculty, and staff have experienced at SIU during this 151 years, I do think it important and necessary to use this time to remind my alma mater of this importance and the significance of the development of this institution. It is in fact a fact that should be recognized, acknowledged, celebrated, and woven tightly into the SIUC frame of reference. And to that end, and in conclusion, I would like to humbly, well, maybe not so humbly, but I would like to request of Chancellor Lane that the inaugural class of Southern Illinois University be among the featured pictures on the webpage of the history of SIUC, because after all, this is where future students are able to see what they can be. Thank you.
It's easy to moderate this panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Barlow, because I knew it. And Dr. McNeese, we're moving right along the way you would like for us to. And now I'm supposed to prompt each speaker. I'm going to ask Hannah Friedman why she's involved with what she is and to tell us what that project is. And I'm also going to encourage her that independently and privately, I think you know somebody else you need to interview for a documentary. I'm just suggesting that. I'm only moderating. So Hannah, please take over now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I absolutely would agree with you. I would want to interview probably everyone here on this panel. So recently, I was able to be a part of a big multimedia project that allowed me to learn a lot more about Carbondale's history. I'm gonna sort of go back to where Harriet started in 1869 when SIU was founded. Like she said, it's always been an integrated school, except it remained almost completely a white faculty until the 60s and 70s. About the time of the 60s and 70s, the students, a part of the civil rights movement, were protesting all over Southern Illinois, in Carbondale, DuQuoin, Benton, Anna, Cairo, all over the region to protest, and this led to SIU's increase in minority staff members and faculty. This led to, as Harriet said, the rate of, or the percentage of minority students, was around 15%. And at the time, after a push for minority faculty, it led to the current minority rate of students, which is around 27%. This not only created more diversity, but also allowed for the Africana Studies minor to become significantly more developed. And however, the Africana Studies department wasn't able to become a major until 2010. It only remained a minor through all of SIU's history until 2010, when the faculty pushed for it to become a major. And however, around 2017, because of a lack of funding with the department, the Africana Studies department lost around half of its teaching faculty and was almost threatened to be completely shut down. Because of a lot of protesting and opposition from faculty and students, luckily the major was able to stay at SIU, but it still today is struggling because of its lack of funding by the administration. So I learned a lot about this history through this project that I was asked to be a part of around the beginning of September, when the Carbondale Community Arts Council asked the journalism department at SIU to create a multimedia project about Black Lives Matter. This project would sort of be a collaboration of all the different news groups we have here. So we have the River Region, Alt News, and the Daily Egyptian. I am one of the executive producers of Alt News, where we focus mostly on documentary work. So I was asked to create a documentary on the subject of Black Lives Matter for this project. In this documentary, I got to interview Father Brown, and I even interviewed some other people for a separate documentary. And I learned so much information, and it was an absolutely incredible experience. Not only did we get to collaborate with other news groups on campus, but we got to collaborate with high school students at Carbondale Community High School. And we got to mentor them, the students who were interested in film and are possibly coming to Carbondale, to school in Carbondale, which was a really amazing experience. I absolutely love being a part of it, and I'm really glad that this documentary that I was able to create led me to being a part of this really amazing panel. I'm actually, a lot of the information that I discussed at the beginning is a part of my research that I did for the documentary, and there's a lot of more amazing information in this documentary and a part of the written stories on the Daily Egyptian. So I'm actually going to just link to this video, and as well as the articles on the Daily Egyptian, but otherwise you can just find all these articles on the Daily Egyptian website, or you can find the documentary on Vimeo. It's called Always a Fight, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Hannah Friedman. You know I'm proud of you, and I think your work is proving that all the people who see you and your work are also going to be proud of you. Now, I'm going to do, as a moderator, I'm going to move straight on up, since the effort and part of the discussion later on will be about who comes next in the history of SIU. We're going to move to East St. Louis now. So Dr. Staples, it's your turn to offer us your 8, 9, 10 minutes of introduction on what you have studied, what you know, and how your insights and perspective fit this discussion today.
All this, thank you so much, and greetings to all of the community of learners from Southern Illinois University. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. I am a graduate of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, with a bachelor's in history. I also attended Carbondale. I attended Carbondale for 2 years. Once my father lost his job, I had to come back for more affordable, meaning minus residence hall living, and I transferred to SIU Edwardsville. Part of this, as I begin to talk about, I think a lot about history and how I lived history, even if it was not during the time period that things occurred, because history is in just the background of everything that we negotiate. And so I've always had this pride in East St. Louis, and that pride, I did not understand it at the time, but it it I come to understand it came a lot from this whole notion of who stayed and who went away. And when you talk about stay and go away, is whether families decided to move to Belleville or move to Collinsville or move to Edwardsville or the surrounding areas. We were, despite any negativity, there was always just this pride, you're from, East St. Louis, and we knew who was in East St. Louis and what East St. Louis developed. And so when we talk about the SIU East St. Louis campus, I'm not going to go to a lot of history of things itself, because Thyssen is going to pick up some of those things. But think back to 1965, and 1965 is when a unit was created at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, called University Services to East St. Louis. As I was thinking about this, I do not like that name, but that is still the name of the unit. I have not told anybody, so we can't blame anybody for not changing it. But 1965, the University Services to East St. Louis began, but in 1966, as Edwardsville was getting up and on the way, there was a program created to address the needs of about 100 local high risk, prospective college students, called the Experiment in Higher Education, which hopefully we will never name something like that again. But it was a 2-year extensive program that offered classes that were comparable to general education courses that would happen at the Edwardsville or the Carbondale campus. That program, after students completed that 2-year extensive program, they would then could enter the university as a junior. And so by that time, when the University Services was created, I want you to remember that at that time, collegiate programs stopped at East St. Louis as things moved to the Edwardsville campus. In 1967, the Catherine Dunham Performing Arts Training Centers began with classes and performances. It kind of established what was for a long time how East St. Louis campus operated. It was separate, but it still did performances and things under the auspices of the Edwardsville campus. And so after a citizen advisory expressed, more frustration about the separation from, by the Edwardsville campus by SIU in Central leaving East St. Louis to Edwardsville, we had about 3 programs that were established during that time, and that citizen advisory committee kind of pressured or petitioned the Board of Trustees to get a single location. That didn't mean to pull the programs. One was at the old, by that time, one of the programs was at the old high school. It was called, I think, the 10th and something tech building. And so that's when they moved between 1970 and 1971. If you've been in East St. Louis, we called it the old Broadway hotel building. I am familiar with that as I went to classes there, but I'll come back to that. In 1982, the Experiment in Higher Education went out. And so at that point, there was truly no academic-based courses that was being offered by Southern Illinois University. at that time. By 1983, Professor Haley, who was then the director, secured the grant process for the Head Start program, which at the time was the largest federal grant ever received by the university. And so then by 1994, we had added Early Head Start, the Latchkey program, the charter school, and then we also had Upward Bound programs. Now, in this going back to the 60s, in this transition, it is important to understand what was going on in East St. Louis by the 1960s. As it was getting going, 12,000 white citizens of East St. Louis had moved out and almost equally replaced with African Americans. And by that time, African Americans were about over 40% of the population of East St. Louis. And in probably 1963, around 200 people. Now, this is happening in 63 in the process of as SIU was leaving, white flight had occurred. Around 200 people marched outside the East St. Louis City Hall to protest jobs for African Americans. The companies there to have an influx of African Americans, over 40% of the population, and 30% of African Americans was unemployed during that time. Also, 1960s, we moved to Dr. Martin Luther King assassination in 1968. And these two communities where Southern Illinois reside had things in common. They weren't great things, but they had something in common where there were fire bombs that was set off after Martin Luther King assassination in both Carbondale and East St. Louis. In this area, police were called to the Alton and Cahokia high schools due to high racial disturbances. So you have this racial conflict occurring at a time where an educational institution that was established here was moving services away from an area that was becoming more and more financially depressed at that time. So I told you I moved to the Broadway building when we come in the 1990s, where there was a significant growth in services to East St. Louis. Under Professor Haley, in comes Tim Staples. I was in the Upward Bound program, and I always say that if it wasn't for SIU, I would not be where I am today. So I was in the Upward Bound program. I took my math, science, and English at the Broadway building. I was bused from Lincoln Senior High School. Yes, for all you East Side people out there, I am a Lincoln Tiger. I hope you continue to watch me after this. But we had that wonderful rivalry that went on. But I took classes there, and SIU was always this kind of, if you allow me to take my mind to when I was in high school, it was this backdrop. It was this backdrop that existed. However, it was not a backdrop that was more that I felt engaged in the city as could be. As we see universities in most urban areas, they are not as involved in the K-12 school districts, the urban school districts. And I always thought that there could have been a greater resource from the university to those places. But I end up at Carbondale. This goes back to, more so what Dr. Barlow began to say, that Carbondale always had an outreach in our school. And so it was different that I was attending an Edwardsville program, and I would go to the Edwardsville campus for not classes, but to go to the library. But the presence in our school at that time was Carbondale. and a lady by the name of Brenda Majors. I don't know if Father Brown remember Brenda Majors. And she would send vans. And I repeated that process my first and second year of Carbondale, where I would drive a van. I don't think they allow those vans on the road anymore, but those 18 passenger vans, and drive to East Side High or Lincoln High to pick up students to take to the program. And there I also met someone who changed my life, Dr. Seymour Bryson. And so, you know, just having those individuals, like I said, I was at that reach out was from Carbondale. One of the things that I am now trying to do in my role, and this is not all my idea, but thanks to all the support of the chancellor and our provost, is that trying to make sure that the students here know that Edwardsville is a place, and know that SIU system is a place that they can go and they can feel welcome. So that's my experience. My buzzer had went out. I have more to say, but I will stop and wait for my questions. Thank you.
And there will be some, trust me. And it's the most natural flow in the world, as you already said that. One of your predecessors in that office is going to be called on now, and he has so much more of a historical perspective because he's so old. Dr. Andrew Theising, if you could make some comments now, we'd appreciate that.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful to be included today. And it's nice to see Dr. Staples in that office. I remember that office. You know, if we look back into the 19th century, when Southern Illinois University gets its start, there really was a distrust of American cities. And if you look all around the country, not just in Illinois, you'll notice that small towns grabbed the institutions of government. So state capitals tend to be in small towns, not big cities. Universities go to places like Urbana or Carbondale rather than in the large population centers. We see this in Missouri as well, you know, Rolla and Warrensburg and Kirksville. You know, these small towns grabbed all the state institutions, and it really came out of a distrust of American cities. And it isn't until the civil rights era starts, it isn't until, you know, Dr. Barlow said that her father was the class of 1954, you know, Brown versus Board of Education. That's when universities started going to urban centers. And so, you know, you know, University of Missouri St. Louis comes into St. Louis in 1964. University of Illinois opens in Chicago in 1965. And it was really a decade before that. It was in the mid-50s when the Edwardsville Chamber of Commerce commissions this study to understand the needs and see if we could support some higher education institution in Metro East. And of course, the answer was yes, that there was plenty of demand, and that you know, Carbondale, being the nearest state institution, would be a fine provider for services to Metro East. And so the university bought up these two plots of land, these two education institutions, one in Alton, one in East St. Louis. And it's doing this in 1957. And so East St. Louis really is one of the birthplaces of Southern Illinois University's venture into Metro East. And it is very important. But as Dr. Staples said, it moved out. It ultimately was headed to Edwardsville. And in 1960, you know, 2,000 acres, you know, more than would ever be needed, 2,000 acres of land is purchased. And these classrooms that were established in East St. Louis slowly started moving. And you know, East St. Louis at the time is, you know, about half Black, half white. And it is an integrated community, and it's actually, integrated may be the wrong word. It is a diverse community, and we were starting to see that white flight. Businesses were leaving, residents were leaving, and here SIU is starting to transition out. And it gives the appearance, even though I don't know that it was the true motivation, it gives the appearance that here's this state institution that picked up and went to Edwardsville. Obviously, the Edwardsville campus has thrived. It's been a very good corporate citizen in Metro East. It has just tens and tens and tens of thousands of graduates and alumni in the area. It has a lot of wonderful diversity, and I'm always pleased that it has two of its anchor buildings are reminders of where it started. The Lovejoy Library reflecting Alton's history, and the Dunham Building representing that East St. Louis legacy. And so I like that the Edwardsville campus does sort of reach out in name to these other places. The last thought that comes to my mind is a more recent event, and that was the uprisings in Ferguson. And you know, SIU has this wonderful history of diversity stretching back to the 19th century. But I think what happened in Ferguson in 2014 with Michael Brown's death shows that we have a lot of work to do. And this is something that happened 20 minutes from our campus. This event affected our students, SIU students, SIU faculty, you know, our people, our friends, our colleagues were there, and we were all touched by it, and the whole world watched. And so I think we have a calling. I think we have a calling as an institution to be responsive to what happened in Ferguson, to understand the mistakes that were made, to understand how we can do better. And I think that we can look in East St. Louis and say the same thing. We can look and say, hey, you know, we can do better here. And Dr. Staples' office provides wonderful services to thousands of children each week. And it's just, it's wonderful. And at the same time, we can always do better. Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Andrew. Point of privilege. The phrase you used, Dr. Staples, that we have to talk about who stayed and who went away, ties into what Andrew Theising just got through talking about, but it goes back so much farther. The thousands of people who left East St. Louis in July of 1917, some went to Springfield, even though it was a dangerous city, and many of them came south to Carbondale and Cairo and other places, and a whole lot of them managed to get across through the Missouri State National Guard into St. Louis County. So many of Kinloch residents came out of East St. Louis and Florissant. All of those places are part of East St. Louis, Southern Illinois history, who stayed and who left. And my other point of privilege is that I'm part of that who left in 1956 when we moved out of East St. Louis because the industries were closing down and we had no real economic options. But speaking about devastations and riots and all of that is a natural way to move right straight to Springfield, since East St. Louis was affected by the 1908 race riot there. As Judge Milton Wharton has often said, it was a warm-up. It gave people a practice session on what to do in East St. Louis. But the magnificent fact that East St. Louis and Carbondale are both the great beneficiaries of that healthcare system that is in Springfield, this is the perfect way to move right into that. And Dean Todd, you're smiling so nicely that I'm just sure you're going to start talking right now.
Yes, I am. Good evening, everybody. I've lived in Illinois since I was a little kid, and went to SIU School of Medicine to get my medical degree. And anybody who's gone to any school in Illinois or who hears me say I'm from Springfield, Illinois, always says, oh, Abraham Lincoln. And so, sometimes people assume I'm going to talk about Abraham Lincoln, but I'm not. I'm going to talk about a much darker episode in the history of Springfield that ties very nicely into the founding of the medical school and the medical school's mission, which is what our students are going to talk about after I get done. So I'm going to share with you this evening some of the background observations on the Springfield race riot of 1908. And I can't cover all the details or impacts in the next few minutes, but I hope to do it justice by pulling out some of the major events and themes. So it's important to understand that the Springfield race riot is of more than just local importance. It's one of the major events in the area that American historians call the nadir of American race relations. That large-scale racial violence could happen in a northern, typical American city, right? Every state's got a Springfield, which was the hometown of Abraham Lincoln, especially, really shocked the nation. So I'm going to place this event in context. We're going to go back to 1908, the end of the Reconstruction era. Many freed slaves from border states like Kentucky and Indiana have moved to Springfield because it is an agricultural and a business and a transportation center. In fact, in 1908, Springfield had a higher proportion of Black residents than any other city in Illinois, including Chicago. Prohibition was another hot topic that was warming up in our country. Many surrounding counties in central Illinois and downstate Illinois were declaring themselves dry, but Springfield stayed wet in Sangamon County, and it earned a reputation for vice and violence and licentiousness. And then finally, at this time, the nation was undergoing some financial hardship, which gave rise to social tension around jobs and wealth. And this was especially tense between Blacks and whites in Springfield. So all of this came to a head in mid-August of 1908, when 2 Black men were jailed in Springfield, one accused of murder of a white man and one accused of rape of a white woman. And a mob of white men and women began to form outside the city jail. It eventually numbered 5,000 people. The sheriff, unbeknownst to the crowd, had moved the accused men out of the jail to a different city, I believe Bloomington, for their safety. And the sheriff expected the mob to disperse when he announced that these men were not in jail in Springfield anymore. But they did not disperse. They went on a rampage that lasted 2 days. The rally cry was, Abe Lincoln brought you in and we're going to take you out. At the end of 2 days of brutal violence and the intervention of the state militia, the mob had destroyed and burned to the ground both the Badlands and the Levee, not only Springfield's Black neighborhood, but also its Black businesses. There were 2 lynchings and 9 Black deaths. There were 7 white deaths, 5 by state militiamen, 2 by suicide. There were 200 arrests, 150 indictments, but in the end, there was only 1 conviction of a white man, which was for petty theft. And so here we have the pillars of racial injustice that we continue to battle today. Mob justice, intentional destruction of Black capital, justice denied, and finally, erasure. For the levees in the Badlands were not rebuilt. They were paved over and ultimately turned into a parking lot. And the event is still to this day not taught in the Springfield public schools. And the victims were not recognized by the city until 100 years later. The Springfield race riot did and does continue to ripple and echo in our community and in the community at large. Soon after the massacre, a group of Black and white activists met in New York City, and troubled by the brutality of the riot in Springfield, they established the NAACP to try to help improve race relations. And the city of Springfield commemorated the 100th anniversary of the riot by number one, officially acknowledging that it had occurred, which they had not done before then, and marking with plaques the boundaries of the destruction. A statue of the event was erected to memorialize the tragedy, but it does not allude to the lynchings, so as per a city spokesman, quote, not to arouse emotions, unquote. A railroad overpass being built a few years ago uncovered the foundations of some of the houses destroyed in the riot, which was explored by a team of archaeologists and preserved as a historic site. But there are more insidious ways that the events and tensions of 1908 still remain with us in Abe Lincoln's hometown. According to federal data, Springfield remains one of the most segregated cities in America. And in 2010, Forbes magazine named Springfield the third most violent city per capita in the United States of America, with over 800 violent crimes per 100,000 residents. The average nationwide is 62. I want to illustrate this with a personal anecdote that underlies the way these two things work together in our community. A few years ago, the chief of police came to SIU School of Medicine to an auditorium filled with students and faculty to be on a panel about gun safety. And someone stood up and asked the chief about our extremely high violent crime rate. And he told us that this violence was so confined to a few small areas of the city that people like us had nothing to worry about as long as we stayed where we were supposed to be. Rarely have I ever publicly witnessed such an overt statement about segregation and the perpetration of injustice and violence in a community. So now I want to bring this conversation around to healthcare, because that's what we're really talking about. When I talk about all this stuff, I'm talking about the health and the safety of our community. And if you look on communityhealthrankings.org, which is a site run by the Robert Johnson Foundation about community health, you will see that Sangamon County, where Springfield is, ranks second in Illinois for healthcare resources and clinical excellence. And we think the medical school has a lot to do with this, and we are very proud. But out of the 100 some counties in Illinois, we rank number 82 in terms of health outcomes. Things like life expectancy and maternal fetal mortality and violence prevention. In this brutal inequity, I can hear the echoes of the race riot. This inequity is the School of Medicine's challenge, and it's SIU's challenge. So it's very fitting that on the boundaries of the devastation of the Springfield race riot was built in the 1970s, our medical school. Our campus sits right on that devastation. And I'm very proud to turn this discussion now towards how our school seeks to meet the challenges of equity and community health that the history lesson of the Springfield race riot sets before us. So I'd like to turn this over to Beret Madden and Miriam Bakare, who are going to talk about our medical school.
Thank you for passing it along to us. We actually created a PowerPoint, so I'm just getting the screen together. Okay, hello everyone, good evening. Once again, my name is Bray Madden, and I'm here with my colleague, Miriam Bakare. We are third-year medical students, and we are both the co-presidents of the Student National Medical Association. We want to take you through the journey of SIU School of Medicine and the admissions of African-American medical students.
We cannot talk about the African-American history at SIU without talking about Dr. Edwin Lee. The origin of diversity at SIU begins with Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee was admitted to the Sangamon County Medical Society in 1949 in a unanimous vote. Hospitals were segregated, and there was only one building in town where Black physicians were allowed to practice. Hospitals were integrated in the 1950s. His office at the Lee Medical Building on the corner of Jackson and 13th Street is the first medical building in Springfield, Illinois, owned by Black physicians. He worked here until he died in 1993, just 4 months after retiring. He didn't stop at being a physician. He was an advocate. It was Dr. Lee's push for a diverse physician in Springfield that influenced the acceptance of the first Black medical student into a charter class at SIU School of Medicine in 1975.
Minority enrollment has been an intrinsic part at SIU School of Medicine's origin and history. At this time, minorities only represented 3% of the enrollment classes of medical schools. Dr. Levester Thompson, originally from Missouri, was the first African-American medical graduate at SIU through the initiative of Dr. Edwin Lee. He went on to become a family medicine physician practicing in Virginia. 1 year later, the class of 1976 did not have any African-American students. In 1970, the AAMC, via the Expanding Educational Opportunity for Blacks and Minority Students, approved a report to set a goal that at least 12% of the entering medical school should be underrepresented minorities by the year 1975. The questions arise: how does one keep the dream alive of Dr. Edwin Lee and make sure that SIU continues its push for diversity? How do we increase the recruitment of medical students, minority medical students at SIU? The Medical Dental Educational Preparatory Program, known as MEDPREP, began in 1972, and the first class was launched in 1973. The mission and the sole purpose was to increase the number of medical minority group physicians practicing in Central and Southern Illinois. Since 1973, MEDPREP has produced over 1,400 alumni, in which about 17% continues their medical education at SIU School of Medicine. This program provides rigorous training in personal, professional, and academic development, and majority of the students are Black or of Hispanic culture. And not only do we include Midwest, we expose students from the East and West Coast to SIU. This program also provides networking opportunities via convocation series in which minority physicians in the Carbondale or surrounding areas meet MEDPREP students and lecture about their journey to medicine. Miriam and myself are both MEDPREP alumni.
According to data, SIU currently outperforms 93% of about 160 medical schools in the United States and Canada when it comes to its percentage of graduates who are Black. But our numbers of Black graduates at SIU has remained inconsistent in numbers. For example, in Dr. McNeese's class of 1986, there were 6 Black graduates. Then the following year, there were 10. Then you fast forward to as recent as 2019, there were only 4 graduates. As you can see, these numbers are unpredictable and inconsistent. So, SIU is working on accepting more Black students, but how are those students included? The Student National Medical Society, Association, or SNMA, is a program founded in 1964 and is committed to supporting current and future underrepresented minority medical students, addressing the needs of underserved communities, and increasing the number of clinically excellent, culturally competent, and socially conscious physicians. The chapter at SIU has become a prominent pillar on the campus with its presence. SNMA at SIU started the Pipeline program, which is a medical enrichment program for high schoolers. We've collaborated with the community churches in Springfield to provide metabolic and hypertensive screenings. Recently, our chapter volunteered in the lower income parts of Springfield to assist in COVID testing. We have also partnered with Black Lives Matter at Springfield to create a video that will be distributed to the Black community that challenges the different myths that often prevents them from getting their flu vaccine.
As African-American students at SIU, we are grateful for our efforts and strides in African-American history at SIU, but there is still room for improvement. On April 6, 2020, Dean Cruz put out a statement. We will restate and recommit to our pledge to be an anti-racist organization, as articulated in our new strategic plan. Anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies and practices, and attitudes so that the power is redistributed and shared fairly. We stand beside our African-American sisters and brothers. We support you. We will fight for you and with you. Right now, SIU varies in the amount of minority graduates, ranging between 3% to 18% in the given year. The last graduating class was only 6%. We hope to see these numbers become steady each year at 12%, with a focus on recruitment of minority male physicians. We at LAST want a more equitable and just environment. We value diversity, but how do we make sure that our African-American students are getting justice? And how, as an institution, are we addressing systemic barriers? Just to name a few, hopefully we put an end to race-based medicine curriculum and focus on inequalities and social disparities of health. We would like to see more diversity and representation in the faculty at SIU with the active recruitment of minority physicians. Thank you, Father Brown. We pass it back to you.
This is just amazing. I am just so proud of you all. One other point of how this all ties together, Dr. Todd, that statue that was dedicated for the commemoration of the 1908 Springfield massacre, thank you very much for saying that, was done by an SIU Carbondale alumnus, Preston Jackson. I just wanted to make sure we all knew that in so many different ways, we are in communication with one another across this entire region. It's a blessing. And once again, the young shall lead us. I really appreciate that PowerPoint, and I'm sure it'll be shown other places and other ways. Now, there are supposed to be all sorts of just this derecho of questions coming in from the world to be asked. And unfortunately, they didn't show up yet, but we do have a number of questions that were prepared by people ahead of time. And almost none of them, as I look at them, have anything to do with anything you all talked about today, which I think is so wonderful because that just proves that education works. And I'm also going to take another small, teeny weeny point of privilege and suggest that if Dr. Wes McNeese, whose name has been brought up several times now, decides that he wants to interject, not interrupt, interject something from his own perspective as an alumnus, as a native of East St. Louis with his own memoir that is readable and worth knowing about, and the fact that, you know, he just knows stuff. If he has anything he wants to say, he can, you know, go through the proper vetting process and maybe we'll give him a chance to say something. I just wanted to make sure he knew that though, because after all, I try to be the moderator that survives this evening. This is where we need to ask. And one of the reasons I brought that up was because I'm going to throw this out to the people who have been, you young people, I really love that PowerPoint. One of the other things that I have to say about East St. Louis and its history of involvement with SIU Carbondale, I grew up in the John Robinson Apartments, Dr. Staples. So you can't tell me nothing about Lincoln High School, because one of the greatest Black drum majors in the world was over there. And I watched him and imitated him when I became a drum major in Wisconsin. But we lived across the street from Lincoln High School. And I knew about all the teachers in that incredible school district who came out of our College of Education down here. But mortuary science, which has such an African cultural component to it, how we care for and respect and make sacred the remains of our departed ancestors. How many of the morticians in East St. Louis, for instance, from the 1930s and 40s with the Nash sisters all the way up to Carl Officer, and students even to this day coming down here. That's another part of this regional conversation and support, the circle of education and cultural development. So I'm just going to ask, and the one comment that has come in is how proud people are of the med students. Well, yeah, I mean, I've established that. The question I guess I would ask from these prepared ones is, since I brought up a couple people and just mentioned the morticians and the educational culture, are there other great alumni we should actually lift up and recognize from any one of these three campuses or in between? Dr. Barlow, you mentioned some of them, and so did the medical students, and so did you, Dr. Staples. And I'm just wondering, just for the sake of kind of a chant of saints, a naming of some of the alumni who survived from Cairo to Springfield, and the people who chose to be alumni, like Catherine Dunham, whose presence is still felt in the Dunham Center in East St. Louis. If any of you all would like to just share the names of some people you always hold up in reverence and respect, I think that would be a beautiful thing right now.
Well, one of the individuals that I still get starstruck, if she walked in the building, I would leave you all right now to pay homage, and that is Dr. Shirley Portwood. Just an amazing, amazing person that I encountered when I went to the Edwardsville campus. You know, because of leaving Carbondale, she picked up where Dr. Bryson left off, where I left Dr. Bryson, and just has been amazing to the system, to our institution, and so that's my one person right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would say, even though this person is not an SIU alum, this individual, for so many of us, particularly those of us who ended up working on graduate degrees and doctoral degrees, would not have been able to make it through that, what I always call educational hazing, trying to finish a degree. And that individual was Dr. Melvin Moore. He was a professor in, at the time it was educational leadership at SIU. And he was an individual who helped so many of us throughout his years at SIU. And he was a buffer in many cases. He was an advocate. You know, he was gonna make sure that you were ready. You know, he was gonna give you those tools, but Dr. Moore was certainly someone that helped so many of us, particularly in the mid 80s that were going through that. And then certainly, you know, I mentioned in my discussion, you know, before even knowing Seymour Bryson or Harold Bardot, you know, how as undergraduates, we revered them because we had learned that they were working on PhDs. But obviously from listening to Timothy, right, them working on their PhDs just did not stop in the 70s. They continued to give back throughout their long careers. And me personally, I certainly was blessed to be able to call Dr. Bryson, may he certainly rest in peace, a mentor of mine when I was at SIU and an administrator, as well as Dr. Bardot. And I'm sure, you know, I know that there are so many others that deserve that sainthood, which would be a great and wonderful research project, right? For somebody to do.
Yes, it would be.
Um, because they're there. And I mean, I truly believe, as I said, their spirit, I think that their spirit through oral history or just an understanding has continued, particularly among African American students, even if you don't know who they are, but it's just something that they left. And as Dr. Moore would have said, about leaving the pile higher than you found it. That was one of the things that he always said, and I hold to that. And he taught us that.
That's beautiful. Thank you so
I
much.
have-
Yes.
I have 3 names that I'd like to put out because I see these faces hanging in our Hall of Fame when I walk down the hallways. Of course, we have to acknowledge that Eugene Redmond, the poet laureate of East St. Louis, 2-time winner of the American Book Award, now the National Book Award for Poetry, is not only an alum, but a retired faculty member, and just a creative force in East St. Louis. Edna Patterson Petty is another graduate from the Edwardsville campus, and she is a internationally respected artist, and her sculpture adorns the East St. Louis campus, Monty the Turtle. And then Thelma Mothershead, where her name was mentioned before, not only a Carbondale alum, but also an Edwardsville alum for her graduate work. And I was thrilled that I was able to be the person to nominate her for an honorary degree from the university a few years back. And so not only is she in the Hall of Fame, but she's also has the honorary doctorate, which Professor Redmond got a doctorate as well. So those are 3 big alumni who are just real sources of inspiration for me.
And I would, since you're going in that place, we have to also mention Reginald Petty, who is an alumnus of this school with 2 degrees and was the deputy director of the Peace Corps in Eastern Africa and is the founder of the East St. Louis Historical Society, and has explained an awful lot to us both, Dr. Theising, over the years. I would suggest that he has explained things. But you all remember that just recently during our diversity week, we had Thomas Parham give a talk here as a president of a university campus. But then you had James Rosser, who was president of a university campus and was the first real director, in fact, if not in name, of the Black Studies program here. Yeah. So you've got people who not only left the pile higher, but created whole new ways of memorializing. And to me, history is not what bad things happen. History is what we did about them. So that's my, again, point of personal privilege. Anybody else want to throw some names out there or anything else you want to throw up? Yes.
I would just throw up as we think about it, just smile. As a Black student, these individuals are the individuals were what helped us make it through. I was in Snyder Tower, and I tell you, I had white suitemates that never even talked to me. So those individuals, Brenda Major and Dr. Bryson and all of the staff and the program I was in, they helped us to create a community around us. So I did not struggle when I was there. When I came, to Edwardsville, I still had that community. But what I'm saying is that we have more than scholars. These were individuals that took really a hold of our life. And I have the privilege now to, run into those people that work now at Edwardsville and, from my college advisor, to my teachers that were there. I wouldn't have made it through without those individuals. And I think we as a system have done a good job at hiring individuals who are dedicated both to their craft and to their students and to the mission of the institution.
I would agree. There is a question that came up from a really close ally and colleague of ours asking about, are there any records about all the sundown towns that existed in Southern Illinois? Now, Dr. Lowens wrote a book on sundown towns, and when he came here and gave a talk, he did mention that he expected to find maybe 5 or 10 of them in the state of Illinois, and found the largest number possible, over 90 of them in this state. And you can only ask a little bit about sundown towns in Southern Illinois because it has lingered all the way up to Belleville. Because I know that we were allowed into Belleville after dark only during the Christmas week, when we could go and look at the Christmas decorations, because there were police cars blocking East St. Louis people from going up there at night. This was still as late as the 1960s. And so, Dr. Staples, when you mentioned people who say they're from Belleville, I have a response to that, which is not appropriate for this kind of a panel discussion, because I want to tell them where they came from and who the people are. So
there
yes.
was a historian that I was reading about when I was reading about the race massacre that suggested that one of the motivations was to turn Springfield into a sundown town through the efforts of this mob. That was one of their things that they wanted as an outcome, but they were unsuccessful in doing so.
Well, that was true for so many of the great race riots and pogroms that happened all across the country, from Florida all the way up to Detroit and like you said, into Springfield too. That was the effort. And it's amazing how some of these things echo still through time to today. I would only also like to just reference some of the henchmen, gender in specific, of Harriet Barlow that she brought along with her to help do those kinds of quality of life things you're talking about, Dr. Staples, at this school, because she was not alone. And every time I talk about her being a legendary influence on this campus, there's Deborah McCoy, there's Pat McNeil, there's Anna Jackson, there's just so many people that she was part of making this work. And that's just something I wanted to make sure that in the chant of saints, we've all got those people that make the quality of life. And there's another question coming from our wonderful current president of the Black Alumni Group. And she wants to make sure that all the names that we brought up, and I didn't take a note of it, and I'm sure it's on YouTube, that she wants to make sure that they're highlighted in the Black Alumni Group newsletter. I think that's absolutely appropriate. And I think it's something that we should be doing, because every day is Black History Month. So, young people, y'all just been sitting there nodding your heads. See, this is the most beautiful thing about Zoom meetings, is I can see all this nodding going on. So now I want to have this is call and response. It's your turn now. And I think I don't think it's unfair of me to say that there are 3 young people in this group. I hope nobody takes offense at that. All of y'all are young to me, but the 3 youngest are the young. Come on now, say some more stuff about what you have learned today, or what you would like to add to this conversation.
I actually want to make a comment about the sundown town that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until my second year of med school when I learned what that actually was, because I'm from the Chicagoland area. And the only reason I learned about it is because during our 3rd year for our family medicine rotation, we have to do away rotations in rural areas. So the only reason I heard about it is because Black students were telling me, hey, you might not want to do this town. I heard they're a sundown town. And I'm like, what is a sundown town? And that was actually my first time actually learning what that is. So it's just sort of a reality. And the town I end up doing, it was Hershey, Illinois, where I end up doing my family medicine rotation. It was definitely a sundown town. No, knowing what I know now, it was definitely a sundown town. But the people are very sweet, but it was just not a place I want to be by myself at night. So.
Father Brown, you're muted in case you didn't know. There you go.
Usually other people mute me. This time I did it myself. Thank you. But that's part of the informal orientation of students to this day on this campus, is that kind of warning to people. And it's kind of a shame that people still think that that's necessary. But I think that given the state of this country right now, it's not a bad thing to at least be paying attention, not becoming traumatized by it, but at least paying attention. Sometimes you can be pleasantly surprised. But I think that with James Lowen, when he wrote that book, Sundown Towns, it's just we all need to know it.
I wanted to say about that sundown town, right? Yeah, that was something that everybody was warned about. You know, there's certain places that you just could not go, bet not go, don't even look in that direction. So given that, imagine my surprise and my husband's surprise when we read in the Southern Illinoisan about a few months ago when there was a Black Lives Matter protest in Anna. And I'm going to be nice, and so I
know you are.
Say what you know we all said Anna meant, but that's what we were told that it meant, and so it was very shocking, and it was good, but it was just very shocking to see that occur, and people get out of there unscathed, so to speak, right? So yeah, I found that very interesting.
That was kind of what I was hinting at when I made the comment that sometimes you might be pleasantly surprised. I was thinking of that march, but I'm thinking of places like Cobden,
yes,
which now has a Roman Catholic church with a Hispanic liturgy, that has an increasingly growing number of small businesses that are aimed at the Hispanic community down there. And you and I both know that would not have happened 25 or 30 years ago. I went down there and gave a talk at the Catholic Church, and they had one for everybody and then one in the cafeteria for all the Spanish-speaking people. I have no idea what they thought I said, but I said something. But you know, it's hey, but no, that there are. I'm sorry, but there are changes that are taking place down here. But it's the young people who are driving it. And that's important to know about this history. And that brings us back to that incredible multimedia project that has been established that Hannah Friedman sent us the links to. Her co-conspirator, Kaylee, is that her name? Or yes, the editor of the Daily Egyptian. They have been doing so much to just educate all of us, because it's not taking place in a lot of the classrooms, but it never did.
Yeah, absolutely. We've really been very fortunate to, I've been very fortunate to be able to work with such amazing, talented writers and creators, a part of these other news organizations that I would not have been able to be connected with otherwise if I did not do this project. I actually, throughout this, they have a lot of different written stories that were published in their print editions and are also published online. But for a lot of those stories, they involved going to protests that happened in the area, all over the area. And I actually had the opportunity to go with them and get some footage of these protests in places like Anna and other protests in Carbondale and Murfreesboro and more. And it was very, very interesting. Unfortunately, something we found was there were a lot more less Black Lives Matter protesters at these protests, and there were more anti-protesters than protesters. which was very surprising. And actually, one of the other pieces that we did for this project was I got to interview a woman named Easter, who her kids were the first Black kids to graduate from Anna High School. She actually, it was very interesting talking to her, because while you might think that if you are from this area, you might think that Anna, because of some of its history, is a very historically racist town. But she actually shined a lot of light about how times are very different and how welcome she was into the community, possibly because of her kids being athletes, but she was very welcomed into the community. It wasn't until these protests that she started to actually see people showing hate and speaking out against her in the Black community, which is very interesting. And she's had a lot of very amazing conversations with people. But it wasn't until recently that a lot of hate has also been coming out of this, where it sort of hasn't been as much of a problem in some areas here anymore. It definitely still is, but yes.
Other comments about that? I think that your point is very well taken, and Anna has always been notorious. As I remember hearing the story, the young white woman the man who was called Froggy James, who was lynched in Cairo in 1909, that young white woman had been from Anna. Whether or not that's true is immaterial. It's gone on for that many years. The other question that I think would be kind of interesting is, Dr. Todd, you kind of brought this up. But I would like to just expand this to alumni of the different generations and decades. When there were things going on, Dr. Barlow, like the 1968, 1970, 1972 unrest here, how did the universities, and there seems to be that it's always protests. I mean, Dr. Staples, you got to say something about what your students in East St. Louis and other places, as like Dr. Theising has said about the students in Edwardsville, about Ferguson and all. What strategies do our university campuses employ to help train our young students to survive some of these traumas? Do we have programs in place? Were you educated? How were you taught to go through some of this? I mean, Dr. Barlow, you mentioned Dick Gregory as a hero in the family. They didn't have people, they did have people in the community, because they all had, in those days, they had to live in the community because they couldn't live on campus in that generation. But how do you all see the school itself helping to educate you to be successful in dealing with the potential trauma of this kind of racial unrest in each generation? Because it's going to be different across time.
As I look back on those days, and of course, I was not at SIU during the riots that happened in the spring, but certainly was there, in 72 and in 71 when the Panthers were there, and that house was shot up and all of that. And the university, the answer, right, didn't come from the university as I recall it in terms of being an undergraduate. The answer about how to cope and how to navigate that came from individuals. I guess we would call these folks woke individuals now, that we tended to gravitate to and to seek counsel from, to be able to try to figure out how to navigate certain situations when racial unrest or tensions would come to play. I think as I just reflect, now that was a long time ago, Father Brown, so I got to really dig deep on that. But as I think about that, put that as a backdrop to now. And you know, I'm at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. My fear is that how institutions react now is how institutions reacted 20, 30 years ago. And from a standpoint of assuming that they don't have to react, or that the issues or concerns that students may be feeling at the time or going through are not, I don't want to say important, but let me just say are not important. And I say that, you know, because things have a way of evolving, right? But the way that institutions react to certain things today doesn't seem like that they have evolved much from when I was in school. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. In October of last year, there was a threat. There was a written threat on that came out on the UNLV campus. And that threat said to kill all the Blacks and Bernie supporters. Now, those of us who were privy to that message continue to try to get the university to respond in a way that would let students, particularly African-American students, know that the institution cared, and that while it may not have been a valuable or a viable threat from a police standpoint, it was a threat, a viable threat to the African-American community. And many of us who were administrators, you know, working with grassroots students, tried to truly explain this in as nice a ways as possible, as professional ways as possible, but sometimes it got kind of heated. I was in the room, so you can assume that it got kind of heated, right? Well, fast forward, I mean, obviously, I don't think that UNLV handled that situation correctly, because it left a lot of scars, right? And then, you know, moving forward months later, with the Black Lives Matter, I think at that point in time, the UNLV realized that they had not taken advantage of this opportunity back in October to have been really proactive, right? And now recognizing now with the movements that are going on now at the grassroots level, certainly from students, that, okay, now we get it, right? So I say all that to say that I think that institutions may be on the cusp of getting it and recognizing that that we as administrators and institutions are also responsible for helping students navigate the real world, okay? But I don't think that that was the case when I was certainly an undergraduate. I think that that was something that we were all left to kind of figure out on our own, trying to figure that out.
Can I piggyback after Dr.
Please do.
Barlow?
Please do.
I would have to say, from the School of Medicine perspective, I feel like things have not changed since then. Given COVID and George Floyd and everything that happened, I say that it created the perfect storm where people had to recognize the disparities and had to recognize the inequalities that affect us all. And given that the African Americans at SIU School of Medicine is such a small percentage, they look at it though as if it's not a majority problem, it's not a problem at all. So for us, it seems like through our SNMA chapter and through our other underrepresented interest groups, we always have to come together to tell the school what we want and what we need to make happen. So during this time, during COVID and when the killings happened, police brutality, most of us was in the middle of our biggest exams of our lives. We were taking our final steps, we were taking in exams, and our school sent us the email like, we understand what's going on, but you guys still have to take your exam. And we felt like from our standpoint, I'm originally from New York. COVID went crazy in New York. I'm worried about family, catching COVID cases, members dying. I'm part of the African-American community, so my heart aches when we're killed by police brutality, and yet I still have to be a medical student, feeling like my school does not support me and does not stand by me and can understand at that point, maybe I needed one more week before I needed to take my exam. And so through our SNMA, through our marginalized student network, through our White Coats for Black Lives, and our wonderful allies that we have at our school, that is a mixture of both minorities and white people who all came together and advocated, like, you have to listen, we have to make a statement. And shortly after, we became an anti-racism institution. So most of the times these change is put on the students. And when the students speak out or become a little disruptive, that's when the school listens and wants to stand by and protect us.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and that's certainly different in the generations, that a lot of times now the students will really, have a voice. But one thing that's similar in my time and what's now, that a lot of the burden would fall on Black faculty and staff. Particularly heavier is the Black dean of every white institution. Every white institution have the Black dean. They're not a dean. They're not called a dean. They're not paid a dean. I'll pay homage to Dean Earlene Patterson from the Edwardsville campus, and my dean at the Carbondale campus, you have mentioned, Father Brown, and it's Anna Jackson. So it falls on those people to have that burden to both teach us how to cope, how to survive, and how to navigate. Because we have the frustration we have to go through, and people like Dean Patterson will say, "Wait a minute, let me let you understand how this system is working and how the university is working. And if you move this chess move this way, that's a cause against you." And so let us focus on your sanity, and let us focus on you getting through that class, getting through that teacher, because they tenured. Everybody have talked to the dean and everybody about this person, but you got to get through it. And so that's similar in the generations, that burden is falling. People, we have cost some people their tenure because they're so busy dealing with our frustrations in the academy, which hinders their work.
Now, I saw Hannah and Mariam both nodding their heads in response to what you were saying. So now they're going to have to say something too.
I absolutely agree. One of the things about, one of the interests I want to get into is academic medicine. And it just, one of the roadblocks about African Americans going into academic medicine is, it seems like you always have, instead of me being the director of internal medicine, I have to be the director of diversity. I have to represent, it's just this extra burden that comes with just being Black. I want to be a student too. Even during the COVID and George Floyd situations, I had the burden of thinking about what's happening with my brother in Chicago. Is he one of the targets? I had to think about my mom who has comorbidity. It just seems like this extra burden when it comes to being Black in a professional position. It's never just me just being a student like anyone else. It's just this extra burden. So I absolutely agree. Even if you're not a dean of diversity, no matter what position you are in school, it is this unspoken. Is it really unspoken? It's just, it's part of this.
I don't think it's unspoken. I mean, I think that it just is, right? We call it, and for years, what we've called it in academia is the tax. It's a tax that you pay. It's the tax that you pay for being female, for being minority, because what's happening is that there are students who will see you. And as a result of just simply seeing you, will come to you for help. And Stephen A. Smith, my husband likes ESPN and watches Stephen A. Smith, right? And Stephen A. Smith says something that is so true. He says, white folks go to work to go to a job. Black people go to work because it's a responsibility. So, and we take that, and particularly in higher education and in academia, we take that responsibility very seriously. And it goes back to what I was saying before, you're leaving the pile higher because you don't want anybody to go through what you had to go through to get to this space, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's a tax and we all have to pay it. And I'm gonna be really honest with you. I get kind of angry when I come across my people and they don't want to pay it because somebody paid it for them to get to where they are. So therefore, you have to pay it.
Dr. Barlow, I've been talking about you for years. And I've always regretted that you left here in 1996 and I came here in 1997.
In 97, but we were probably.
Yeah, spring and fall.
Yes, yes.
And I just, you just proved once again what a powerful force you are. Now, I'm not leaving other people off the hook. Yes, you.
I would just agree with everything you guys have said. It's absolutely amazing. And I would sort of shift this a little to the area of SIU that I'm more familiar with, which is the Mass Communications and Media Arts program and the journalism program at SIU, those of which have an incredibly low diverse faculty and student in general. I know for the news groups, we have many non-white staff members and members, a part of all news groups, but they aren't leading these news organizations. And our faculty remains very mostly white. And I think SIU has placed a lot of money in the wrong places and need to focus more simply at its faculty. And I think that is the best way to increase student enrollment and increase programs in general.
One simple question that somebody raised earlier that I wanted to make sure you did answer this, Hannah, before we finish this entire evening. Did you volunteer to be part of this multimedia event, or did you get corralled into it by some people whose names shall not be mentioned here, who tend to corral all of us into doing things when she wants us to? No, I mean, how did you get involved with this whole multimedia project? Because you've done it with such passion.
Thank you. Well, I love documentary work. That is my passion, and I've been focusing different types of documentary styles and interviewing different types of people and focusing on different subjects. So this is the first time I've focused on a subject like this one. Our show is a lot more relaxed and sometimes comedy based. So this is much more of a serious topic that I really wanted to take on. So I didn't offer to be a part of this. I was asked to be a part of it, but I immediately wanted to produce the documentary. Any of us part of the news organizations could have taken it on. There really were no parameters for the project. It was whatever we wanted to make it. And I was the one that took it and produced 2 pieces out of it. And yeah, I'm really, really happy I got to do it.
Dr. Todd, let me ask you, since you seem to be smiling every time these 2 medical students open their mouths, how are you feeling about this conversation so far?
I agree with what they're saying. Medicine is a very hierarchical, old boy still culture. And I intersect with what they're talking about as a female student and now faculty member. I feel that SIU is a lot farther than it used to be, but there is a lot farther to go. And what I feel very positive about is that we have a dean who, when the students pushed back on him, he said, I'm listening. And as a leader, he put out that statement about being an anti-racist institution. I think when he did that, he did not know exactly where that was going to take us, but he was like, let's do it. And I think he recognizes that a lot of that leadership is going to come from our students, and that is fine. And I enjoy being in that culture where it's okay to be challenged when you have leaders who are like, we're listening. And the students said, we need one more week because it's crazy right now and we cannot concentrate. We're super distracted. We need one more week. And even though the school initially said, nope, take the test, after the students came back and challenged us, the powers that be said, okay, one more week it is, we get it, we heard you. And I'm very proud. I wish that we didn't have to be challenged, but I'm very proud that we listened. That to me is the positive thing, and we'll continue to grow.
And I thank you for that, because that's kind of where we should be now. I would like to ask you, since this is right now, that was a statement about what we need to be doing in the future, where we need to go. But I think that's what I heard you saying. Is that correct? Yeah, excellent. Dr. Theising, you have been involved in studying racial history and politics for a very long time. And I know that you have some ideas about how our institutions, our system should be moving along. Share one or two of those ideas with us, please.
First two things that come to my mind is first creating a welcoming environment, and you know, to hear people speak from different points in time of how SIU was both welcoming and still not welcoming. I think we have an obligation to meet people where they are and make them feel welcome where they are. And I think that's really important. And so our different campuses have different approaches to that. I think all of our campuses try to do that, but I don't know that we're always succeeding. And again, this kind of goes back to something I said before. We can always do things better. And so I think we have to keep trying. I think that's what's at the core of this, is we have to keep trying. We have to realize that the effort that we do today, if it works today, great, but maybe we have to do something better tomorrow. And so it's a moving goal, a moving objective. The second thing that comes in, not only making people feel welcome, but equipping people to succeed. And I think of a faculty colleague that I have who, brilliant young scholar of color. And he is the informal advisor to, 36 students who turn to him for guidance. None of these students are like in his classroom, but these are the people who knock on his door, and his research doesn't get done today like he had planned because he makes space for them. And so I think we need to equip not just the students to succeed, but also the faculty members to succeed. And that comes down to how we do assignments and how we evaluate work at the university. And there's more than one way to do that. Just like there's more than one way to give a test, there's more than one way to evaluate faculty and workflow. And so I think those are the first two things that come to my mind.
Thank you so much. Dr. Staples, one question. What's the most nourishing part of your job for your spirit?
The most nourishing part is knowing that I am assisting an institution to stand in the gaps of a community. Our programs here we not just serve students, but serve families. They are complex. One example I always use is our 7 Head Start centers, because oftentimes when everyone think of Head Start, they think of, oh, we're taking care or educating just children. But our Head Start community service families. Our Upward Bound programs have, the staff have relationship with families as well. So that's the piece through our workforce. I just know, both being from here and understanding that we are standing in the gap, and I appreciate the institution. It's interesting because I'm getting a paycheck and I appreciate it, but I'm also serving an institution that's serving people in a community that's dear to my heart. So, and then seeing that same enthusiasm from, our chancellor, the provost, who I would say have many, many things to do that scares me sometimes their schedules, but have that same enthusiasm. I really, that's what nourishes me.
I want to thank all of you for making me feel so hopeful. And I think that we're probably going to hear a word or two of thanks also now from the president of our system, Dr. Mahoney, who has a way of really tying things together in a way that gives you more hope. So, Dr. Mahoney, it's yours.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, and I hope I don't do anything that makes you less hopeful. So I'll try to do my best to make you more hopeful. First of all, yes, thank you to our wonderful panel. Thank you for sharing both your understanding of the history and even some of the current issues that we face at SIU. And really, in many ways, history is yesterday and anything before that. So history doesn't have to go back a long time. It can be even things that happened this summer, which the medical students talked about really well. I'm a son of a history teacher. So I was brought up understanding the importance of history, and I actually get to teach history of college athletics in my classes. I'm not a trained historian, but I like to say I get to play one in the classroom. And I enjoy that quite a bit. It's one of my great joys. And I often say when they look at changing things in college athletics, the biggest mistake is they look at the problems of today and ignore the history that goes back 100 years before that, and think that doing that will help them solve it. And really, you have to understand the history first. In fact, the first step I take whenever taking a new job is reading the history of the institutions. And I did that both for SIU Carbondale and SIU Edwardsville. And I agree with Dr. Staples, the title experiment in higher education was an unfortunate one, even if the program was well-intentioned. So I had that same thought when you mentioned that. But I did learn a lot about what the history was for the institution. And I think that's an important part. And I think Dr. Todd said it well. Too often we ignore the history of the past, and we try to put it away, particularly when it's uncomfortable history. But I think, again, that understanding of history is critically important if we're going to make change going forward. Sometimes it allows us to understand where people are coming from, what has happened in the past, and how that may have impacted them. Sometimes it brings you to new ideas that you haven't tried before by studying the history. And sometimes it really gets you back to doing something that had been successful before. Just as an example of that, SIU Carbondale is bringing back the Dr. Seymour Bryson Future Scholars Program, a summer program as a bridge program for students, primarily African-American students, to come to SIU Carbondale. That's something that had been successful before. And by Dr. Lane looking at what had been done in the past, Chancellor Lane decided to bring that program back. So studying the history can be really important. As you all were talking today, I was thinking about, there was an editorial in the Chronicle of Higher Education recently by someone from Princeton University. And it was a response to students and faculty and others at Princeton asking Princeton University to address systemic racism, and that systemic racism existed at Princeton University. The writer of the editorial said, well, you're ignoring all of the good things that happened at Princeton and all the good things that Princeton has done. I had a really great conversation actually with one of the SIU Carbondale doctoral students about this article. And actually, to some extent, there's a little bit of both. And that's what we heard tonight, that there is a certainly positive part of the Princeton history, but there's a really positive part of the SIU history that you all brought up. I mean, Dr. Barlow talking about, going back to the first class, having African-American students. That's incredibly rare for higher education institutions across the country. That does not exist a lot of places. And it didn't stop there. As we've talked about repeatedly throughout this evening, the number of graduates, African-American graduates that have come from our institutions, not just good graduates, but great graduates, leaders, I was recently at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. So yes, I'm a historian who likes to go to museums, and was walking through, and there was Charles Nesbitt, who I got to meet at SIU just back about a year ago, and was a big figure in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And so we have a lot of great history that we should be very, very proud of when it comes to our graduates and our students. We talked about the MEDPREP program. Again, that is a unique program that does not exist across the country. I was just bragging about the program to my colleagues at Winthrop University. We're so excited to find out it existed, and that there was that opportunity for students to get into medical school. And the fact that we're doing better than 93% when it comes to graduates, that's all something to be proud of in our medical school. And then the work of the East St. Louis Center, and the long history that we've had in East St. Louis, and all the great things that we're doing there. I got to visit just a couple weeks ago, and the great things that they're doing there under Dr. Staples' leadership are things we should be proud of. So there's a lot of good, and we want to celebrate the good, and we want to recognize the good, much like the editorial writer was saying, we need to recognize the good things at Princeton. That being said, that doesn't mean that there's not bad and there's not things that we need to improve on. And I think that's some of the things we talked about here today as well. Interesting, again, we were talking when Hannah talked about the 1960s and 70s, that despite having African-American students for about 100 years, we had virtually no African-American faculty. And we still need to do better on recruiting more African-American faculty even today. We talked about, Dr. Barlow mentioned Chancellor Lane and how historic that was. But it took us 151 years to get an African-American chancellor at SIU Carbondale. So again, we still have work to do when it comes to getting more diversity in the leadership of our institutions. So even some of the good things, and even as we talked about a little bit, the flight from East St. Louis, and that history is still part of what people talk about, and how do we make sure we're still doing what we can do to help out and support East St. Louis, despite the fact we're not offering the educational programs there that we once were. But I want to go back to something that Father Brown talked about was, yes, there are bad things. It's kind of what you do with the bad things that really define what you are as an institution or what you are as a community. Dr. Todd talked about the Springfield Massacre, horrible, tragic incident in the history of our state, but it led to the creation of the NAACP, an organization I'm extremely proud to be part of, and that has done so much great work over the last 100+ years, and it's done fabulous things. So a horrible tragedy actually helped in some ways to create an organization that has had a massive impact. And so as we look at some of the bad things that have happened recently, we hope to change those things and move forward in an extremely positive way and do more positive things going forward as a system. We have a lot of big plans going forward. We're going to talk about a lot of those in the next couple of months. But I do want to leave us with the one thing that Dr. Thiesing said, which clearly you've all said in different ways. We have work to do. There's still a lot to be done. So while we celebrate our successes, that does not mean we don't recognize that there's still work to be done and there's things that we can do going forward. So again, I want to thank the panel for your participation today. And I want to thank everybody who's joined us online for participating in these conversations of understanding. This is our last one for the fall semester, but we'll be back in the spring semester with different topics that we'll talk about. So thank you.